because your heart, every time it beats, it creates an electric current, and that creates an electromagnetic field. And in fact, the heart field is measurable. It can be measured by devices that can be easily accessed, and it can stretch out like several feet. And
would that be called an aura field, or is this a different vibration? I mean, how do you...
I don't like to use the term aura.
Okay.
So this is a biofield, an electromagnetic field, and it doesn't just stay stationary, it pulses according to how your heart rate is changing. And how your heart rate changes depends on your emotions and your state of ease or state of stress. And so your field is pulsing with different frequencies, and each emotion has its own frequency, particular frequency or set of frequencies, so that your field will be sending out information about how you feel. And your field can affect another person's field. And so I'm very interested in that and how energy healing affects the fields.
And how do you measure that?
Okay, so how do you measure the field? Well, I went to Scripps Institute in San Diego. They have something called a SQUID, which stands for Superconducting Quantum Interference Detector. And it picks up, it detects very, very low energy fields, because the heart field is low energy, but it can measure it. And that's what I used to measure the heart field when people were doing Reiki on themselves. And so we thought that perhaps sending Reiki through yourself, or allowing Reiki to flow through yourself, would change your field, your heart field. And in fact, in our experiments, that didn't happen. So either it's nothing to do with the heart field, which I doubt, or another possibility is that we were, because of the type of device it is, a very, very expensive machine that needs to be shielded from what's going on outside. It was electromagnetically shielded, so as we were sitting in the room with the device that was detecting our field, we were separated, in essence, we were separated from the environment. So, and perhaps we need to be connected with the environment for Reiki to work. So that's one possibility why we didn't get any change in the signal.
And what have you done? What do you continue to do with your research? Do you have to go back to San Diego?
Oh no, that was a one-off. We can measure heart rate variability very easily with a very small device that you can attach to the ear or to the fingers, and that will pick up your pulse, and from the pulse, computer software can calculate how that pulse is varying and what frequencies your heart is producing in the heart rate variability. So I've done experiments to see how Reiki affects heart rate variability, and also both people giving it and people receiving it. And other people have also done experiments to see how receiving Reiki affects your heart rate and your heart rate variability. And they show that when you receive Reiki, heart rate usually goes down and heart rate variability increases. There's more variation in heart rate, and that is healthy, because the more variation there is, the more that means that your heart can adjust and adapt to changing conditions.
And so you can directly attribute that to someone giving or receiving Reiki?
Yes, experiments have been done both with Reiki and with what's called sham Reiki, when someone who's not trained in Reiki just does the hand positions and pretends to do it, and also with no treatment.
Have you done experiments with prana healing or any of the other different modalities that work with hands-on energy work?
Yeah, not prana, but I've done reconnective healing, and so we were looking at practitioners that you can actually do reconnective healing on yourself. They usually do it on other people, but you can do it on yourself. So we wanted to see what happens to the reconnective healers as they do it, and also to Reiki practitioners, and then as controls, just untrained people. And we looked at their heart rate variability, and we also looked at the blood flow in the hands. And that device you can see right over there that is called a laser Doppler perfusion imager, and it uses a laser to scan the hand, and then it can give you an image of the perfusion, what's called how much blood is in the blood vessels in the fingertips.
So can you give me your full name?
Ann Baldwin.
And where are we today?
We are in Tucson, Arizona.
At your institute or at?
Yeah, this is the office I have at the University of Arizona, off campus.
And do we have your permission to use this film on Facebook, YouTube, and in a documentary?
Yes.
Thank you. So, can you tell me a little bit about your background and your history, how you came into this work?
Oh yeah. So I did a physics degree in England, and then I got more into physiology, and I did a PhD also in England on atherosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries. So I was interested in how blood pressure affects atherosclerosis, and also how different molecules that are in the blood affect what's called the permeability, or the ease with which molecules can pass through the artery wall. Because if they get blocked, that causes blockages, which then will produce heart attacks. So I was very much a traditional physicist, physiologist. And then I came to the States. I went to Columbia to do a PhD. And then I came to the University of Arizona after 2 years at Columbia. And I was working on rats here, and I got into what's called the microcirculation, or the tiny, tiny little blood vessels that give nutrients to all the tissues. And we were interested in what governs how quickly and how easily different sized and different charged molecules can get from the blood into the tissue. And so I was also interested in inflammation. How does inflammation affect this process? So I was working actually at the VA hospital in Tucson then. I was at the university, but my lab was at the VA, and I was doing experiments on rats. Some of them had inflammation, some of them didn't. And we were looking at effects on the blood vessels and the intestine. And then I moved to the University of Arizona, and my experiments didn't work anymore, because instead of the rats that received the inflammatory mediator like histamine getting inflammation in the blood vessels in the gut, we also saw the control animals that just got saline. They also showed inflammation when we moved to the university, whereas at the VA, just the rats that received the histamine were showing inflammation. So we were very puzzled. And the only thing that had changed was where the animals were kept. And I went down there, and I found it was much more noisy than at the VA. Lots of people coming in and out, slamming doors, lots of machinery turning on and off, keys jangling, and I thought maybe the rats are stressed. So I did some experiments, deliberately putting them in a very quiet room, and they didn't get the inflammation that the rats in the noisy rooms got. So that made me very interested in stress and completely changed my field. And so I'm very interested in how stress affects the body and physiology and psychology as well. And I'm also interested in how you can reduce stress. And how I got interested in energy healing or Reiki was because I needed somebody to help me analyze data. And I put an ad in the university newspaper, and somebody applied for the job who I hired, and it turned out that she was a Reiki master. And I'd never heard of Reiki before, had no idea what it was, but she was very persuasive, and she taught me how to do Reiki, and actually other people in my lab as well. And she said, why don't we do Reiki on the rats and see if it reduces their stress in the noisy environment? So we did get a grant from NIH to see if we could use Reiki on the rats to see if it reduced the inflammation, and we found that it did. We also had a group of rats that had sham Reiki and a group of rats that had no treatment, and they didn't show this recovery that the Reiki rats showed. So that was really the first thing that made me very, very interested in Reiki and the science behind it, because I could see that there was something there that was worth investigating.
So as a scientist, you believe Reiki in the validity of Reiki.
Yes, there are articles published in the peer-reviewed literature. Actually, I belong to something called the Touchstone process, developed by the Center for Reiki Research, and we meet. In fact, we just had a meeting just before I came to see you. We meet monthly by phone, and we have a website where we keep track of all the peer-reviewed scientific research articles on Reiki.
And can you tell us what that is, just so people will have it?
Yes, yeah, it's www.centerforreikiresearch, or one word, .org.
And is there any difference in like Karuna Reiki, Usui Reiki, the different families of Reiki?
There is not enough research to tell you the answer to that question yet. But what we do find when we consider all the studies that have been done, Reiki seems to be very good for reducing anxiety, for reducing chronic pain, for reducing depression, and for general well-being. Those are the things it seems to work for.
And when people have reduced anxiety, depression, stress, do they return to homeostasis better? I mean, that makes them more productive? Can you draw any conclusions from that?
Oh, for sure it makes them more productive. In fact, I work with biofeedback as well as Reiki. And with biofeedback, we focus a lot on the breathing, because most people breathe shallow and fast. And if you control your breathing, it helps control what's called your autonomic nervous system, or the fight or flight response. And breathing and also visualization, kind of positive emotions, both of those will help you become more balanced with your fight or flight response. And when that happens, it does all kinds of things for you. I mean, it reduces anxiety, it does keep you in homeostasis so that you don't fly off the handle. You know, you're more in neutral, and from neutral you can kind of pretty much choose where you want to go. So it's healthy both physically and also mentally and emotionally.
On a personal level, I'm kind of interested on how Reiki and being a Reiki practitioner, did it have any changes on you, on your personhood or your outlook?
Oh, totally. So when I started working on Reiki and at the university, I found that people's attitude towards me changed. And rather than being a proper scientist, I was now some kind of weird person who'd gone off the rails. And it was not a very nice place to be. And for that reason, I decided to give up my tenure, which is very rare. Like I had a full-time permanent job until I decided I didn't want to work anymore. But yeah, I gave up my tenure so that I could work on my own, start my own business, which I did, Mind Body Science, and work with a different group of people. Rather than academics, I wanted to work with the public, and I wanted to help them and use what I'd learnt about stress and ways of reducing stress. I wanted to work with people to help them reduce their stress and just improve, optimize their whole being, just bring out the best in them. So that's how Reiki completely changed my career. I did keep an affiliation with the university, and now, 8 years later, I am teaching a course to undergraduates called Physiology of Mind-Body Interactions.
Tell me about that.
Well, I learned so much from working with people and trying to reduce their stress, but most of the people that came to me they're usually middle-aged or older, and I thought, students need to learn this so that they don't get to where these older people are, because they'll know better, and they need to know it. So I put together a course concentrating on how stress affects your physiology and your psychology, and how learning how to control, for example, your heart rate variability. You can control your fight or flight response and your homeostasis, and so you can really affect your whole life that way. You have some control. And so with this course, it's not just lectures, it's a third lectures, a third practicals, labs. So they go in the lab, they learn how to make measurements of heart rate variability on themselves under different conditions, like what happens to my heart rate variability when I eat a cookie, what happens when I do a gambling game, you know, all kinds of things, what happens when I do exercise. And then at the end they work in pairs and do a project to just kind of tie it all up, how the mind and the body interact with each other under stress.
So when you started Mind Body Science,
Mm-hmm.
when did you start that, and what was your mission? What were you hoping would be the end result?
I started in, I think it was 2007, and my mission was to educate people to, I looked around and I saw that so many people had these chronic problems, disorders, diseases, and they were taking loads and loads of medications with side effects. And I wanted to educate people and give them tools that they could use to help heal themselves rather than depending on drugs. So basically my mission is to do research myself into these tools and how helpful they are, and teach other people how they can use them.
Are you noticing that the stress creates a correlation with the autoimmune? Can you talk about that? What illnesses represent these outcomes of stress?
Yeah, stress, it affects the immune system in different ways depending on the intensity of the stress and the duration of the stress. So in some cases, stress will impair the immune system, so that, you know, if you've been stressed, often you catch the bug that's going around because your immune system is impaired. It's not fighting off the bugs the way it should. On the other hand, you can get to a situation where stress can aggravate the immune system, make it overactive, and that will lead to the autoimmune diseases. So the immune system will start, instead of just fighting invaders and bugs and things that you don't want, it will start working on your own tissue, and that's the link between stress and how it can affect the autoimmune response.
What hormones are released that create this either over anxiety in the body, or where it would prohibit your autoimmune system from being vibrant enough to help?
Yeah, the main hormones are noradrenaline or norepinephrine and cortisol. Those have been shown to bind to various immune cells and alter their function.
So adrenaline's not the problem.
Well, yeah, adrenaline and noradrenaline, they can both affect the immune system. Yeah.
And what happens when there's too much cortisol in your system? What are the immediate reactions to the physiology of the body?
With too much cortisol, one thing is, as I mentioned before, impairment of the immune system, so that you're not so well protected. And then cortisol, too much of the time, it can cause inflammation as well. That's the other arm of the effects on the immune response. If you have too much cortisol, like more with chronic stress, then it can cause inflammation, and you'll be prone maybe to inflammatory bowel disease, arthritis. It doesn't cause those things, but it can aggravate them and stop you from healing.
Can you give some information about what happens in the brain with cortisol? What does stress do to the brain?
To the brain? Well, it's basically the sympathetic parasympathetic system. It's the autonomic nervous system. So stress is going to increase the sympathetic activity, which will cause release of adrenaline, noradrenaline, and will cause your heart rate to increase, and cause you to become anxious or fearful. Yeah, whereas the parasympathetic system acts through the vagus nerve to cause you to relax. It's called rest and digest. And the vagus nerve, it's a long nerve that goes right from the base of the right from the neck right down to the base of the spine, and it innervates all the organs. And if you have stimulation of the vagus nerve, it really helps you relax and helps all the organs relax and work more optimally.
Have you investigated craniosacral work?
No, I haven't.
Okay, because that is
Yeah.
hand positions around the occidentals, which
Right.
would be around the vasovagal
Mhm.
or vagal nerve. So that might have something. So, in Chinese medicine, have you ever looked at Chinese medicine?
Yeah, I don't have I'm not an expert in it, but yeah, I do know about it.
Have you looked at it from a physiological point of view, how they talk about meridians
Mhm.
and the lines? What is your opinion on that as far as, or the Chinese as a modality, Chinese medicine?
Well, it makes sense to me. It's logical, and I have had a little bit of experience with acupuncture. And so, for example, I was thrown off my horse and had an injury, and I went for physical therapy. And they did something, not exactly acupuncture, but they did something called needling, and I was astonished by the effect it had. It really did make the pain go away. So yeah, it seems that it works, and it seems to make sense to me.
How aware are you of your own body's energy now?
Oh, very aware. That's one thing that learning Reiki has done. It very, very aware of my energy and the energy flow. I can feel when I have the energy flowing through me and when it's just stagnant. Definitely.
And do you have an opinion on some of the Eastern philosophy as far as chakras are concerned?
That's another thing. I mean, information about chakras goes back like hundreds and hundreds of years, and in different cultures as well. And this is another thing, it makes sense to me, but unfortunately there is absolutely no scientific evidence. I mean, I've looked and looked, but I haven't found anything that's convincing. So it's something else that we need to find a way of researching and investigating.
Do you have a phenomenological experience of the chakras? Like, do you feel the warmth in where those centers might be
Oh,
if you
for sure.
if you focus?
Yeah. In fact, when I do Reiki treatments, I scan the people with my hands. Oh yeah, I can feel the hot spots. Sure.
So the research that we have now, is more from an experiential point of view, a phenomenological experience.
Yeah.
Are there any, to your knowledge, because you belong to these organizations, is there any documentation, is there any consistency in the experience that people have as a way of documentation?
When they're having sessions?
With the chakras
With the
and
chakras.
energy and meridian lines?
Yeah, I mean, everyone says that they feel tingling and heat without even prompting. I mean, when I work with people, I say, you know, what are you feeling now? Or workshops where I have several people, what are you feeling now? And I don't prompt them at all, and almost invariably they say heat and tingling.
So there is, I mean, so we can verify to that degree just from consistency of experience. And that's scientific, isn't
Yeah,
it?
right.
Okay. So there are people that talk about, and this is kind of far reaching, but I'm just asking your opinion. I'm not even sure if we're going to use it, but I just kind of want to just dialogue with you for a second about things like tarot. If you've studied physics, and the most basic thing I know is that when there is a viewer to the experiment, it changes the energy of the experiment. So there's some viability about energy between two. Can you comment on that?
You mean how one person's energy might change another person's energy? Yeah, I mean, just as I mentioned before about the biofields, the heart biofields, it's just like when you bring two magnets together. Remember when you were at school and you had a magnet and you put iron filings around and they made that pattern? And then you bring another magnet and it all gets disrupted? Yes, this is just like that. I think, that one person's energy can affect another person's energy. And there's something, actually, I was speaking to somebody yesterday who was, she's working as an apprentice for somebody who does equine facilitated learning. And she was saying one of the exercises they do is called heart breathing, and they do it with horses. So they, as they breathe out, they imagine that their breath is going from their heart to the horse's heart, and as they breathe in, that they're receiving the horse's breath. So, yeah, that's an interesting thing about transfer of energy and how it makes you feel. And I think it would be interesting to maybe make some measurements on people while they're doing that, and on horses, because I make measurements on people and horses simultaneously.
I'm wondering what it would be like to, were you able to measure people's emotional responses? Like what the feedback was energetically? I mean, you can imagine what it would be, but I mean, did you have some scientific?
So the work with horses, we were looking at heart rate variability, and the oscillations of the heart rhythm are in three ranges. There's very low frequency, and high frequency. High frequency is parasympathetic relaxation. Low frequency is sympathetic and parasympathetic, and not very much is known about very low frequency. When we made measurements on the horses, they had most of their oscillation was in the very low frequency range. And then when we had horses and humans interacting with each other, we've done it in 3 different scenarios. We've done it in Arizona, where we had people tuning into the horse's energy field. We did it in Tucson, actually, where we had people sending feelings of appreciation towards the horse. And we've done it in California, where we had people doing mindful grooming. And in all cases, these very low frequency oscillations that we see in the horse's heart were seen in the humans, significantly more than if they hadn't been with the horses. And recently, a few studies have come out showing that if people don't have very much of this very low frequency range in their heart rhythm, they're prone to inflammation and PTSD. And so that could be one explanation why equine therapy is so popular with people with PTSD. Perhaps they're getting this different rhythm in their hearts that is affecting their emotions.
They ought to know. How do you want to reach them? What do you think is important for people in their healing process to know about what you do?
I think that it's important for them to know that they have power. They have some control over what is happening in their bodies, and even in their minds. And I would say focus on the heart, because it's difficult to control your thoughts. I mean, your mind has a mind of its own. I mean, people would just start thinking about something. It's very difficult to bring it back and say, no, you shouldn't think like that, you should think like this. And it's almost impossible. But if you focus on the heart, it's a lot easier. You can control your heart rhythm just by breathing, and also maybe something that brings you pleasure. Like, I imagine I'm stroking my cat, and just a simple thing like that will put me into that homeostasis, that neutral zone, that balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. And that information is sent from the heart through the nerves to the brain. And in that way, by controlling the heart, you're going to be controlling the brain. If you're in this more neutral balance zone, that information goes to the amygdala in the brain, where emotional memories are stored. Some people have, they relive trauma, they have huge anxiety effects of things that happened to them in the past that they remember. And part of it is because their amygdala is just reacting too much, too strong. And if you can send this balanced signal from your heart, where your heart rhythm is just in this very balanced rhythm, that actually has been shown to calm down the amygdala so that it's not overreacting. And in that way, people will have more control over not just their physical health, but also their emotional health. Yeah, so anybody who has problems with stress, either physical problems like high blood pressure, or more emotional problems like anxiety, or even people who just want to have more control, and people who are able to just help people optimize what they can do in the performance, whether it's in music or acting, or even just relationships. Performance in everything can be improved by having more control over your autonomic nervous system. And you can do that in different ways. It's not one size fits all. For some people, biofeedback is good. For some people, Reiki is good, or other forms of energy healing. For some people, the equine facilitated learning works for them. So there are various ways. I also do tension release exercises that help the body. It causes the body to shake, and you can just shake all the tension off that has been accumulating in your body. So there are many different ways for different people to get the same result, to be able to get out of this stress response and get into what I call neutral, or I call it also relaxed alertness, where you're relaxed but you're still present, and people will be able to see that they can do way more than they thought they could do. Much covered it. Yeah.
Good.